Alrighty, so what I wanted to do for you guys today was really just kind of take this guy a little further. We're going to do some other stuff next week on him. I kind of feel like I want to show you a little bit of how retopologizing works, so we can maybe build like a little strap or a little bit extra gear for the crab. Just have some real fun, push this guy a little further without going too nuts. Keep it pretty easy. But of course, Alt left rotates camera, Alt middle moves camera, Alt right mouse button zooms camera. Of course, remember we have our move, rotate, and scale tools here, W, E, R, right? But Q is also our selection tool, but since right now the tweak tool's on, remember, if you keep hitting Q, it toggles through your different tools. So you can get to your tweak tool. Now in this case, remember, I actually did set my own quick keys to these things, right? So if you right-click on a tool, you can actually change shortcut or move shortcut. And I like spacebar for my tweak tool. Remember, the tweak tool really just allows you to kind of just click and drag at the same time. So you see how you can kind of view move without actually doing normal selecting first, right? So if you just had W on for your move tool, right, you'd have to select and then move. Although technically you'll notice that it does kind of actually work that way also. It's just the manipulator's kind of in the way, which is, a little bit annoying. But basically keep that in mind. There's actually some really neat stuff to the way Blender works like those things. But it does actually have its own specific tweak tool that doesn't have the manipulator in the way. And it's based on the view, right? It's moving it based on the relative to the camera. So one of the things I just wanted to do is just basically a little more extruding, a little more multi-cutting, just to do a little more shaping. So this video is really going to be about just refining what we have, right? And then, like I said, we'll kind of do a little bit of showing off maybe a new tool or two next week, right? Because we want to make this, a not terribly complicated project, but we also don't want it to be too simple, right? So in this case, what I'm just going to do is I'm going to add some more edge loops, right? And remember your tools, particularly if you're in your modeling, right? Remember you have these up here. If you're modeling, you're definitely going to get access to some of your major tools right here. Not every one of them's in there, right? Some of them are going to be in the vertex, edge, or face areas right here, as well as, of course, when you right-click, whatever your current selection type is, right? When you right-click, it'll bring up tools for that. So there's lots of really great options to get to your tools quickly and easily in Blender. And there's also already some default quick keys, things like loop cut, right? And extrude, and they already have good quick keys like Alt-C and Control-E. In this case, I feel like I want to add a few edge loops just to refine maybe some of the shapes a little bit. So Alt-C, of course, Alt-C will turn loop tool on, right? But it is here. And remember, it's always going to work perpendicular, right? So, and the nice thing is Blender's really good about kind of showing you the nice little yellow preview. So you know exactly where it's going to go pretty easily. And like I said, by default, it kind of snaps to the center. So what you do is you just left click and it puts right in the center there. And then if I wanted to, I could maybe put kind of one more right below it, right? Now at this point, I'm going to hit Q, because remember, that'll turn off your loop cut tool. And then what I can do is I could double left click, right? So remember, double left clicking. So just have your selection tool on, and it can be the tweak tool also. You see when I went to Q, went to the tweak tool. So the tweak tool can actually still work like a selection tool. And when you actually get used to that, it's really, really cool. You can actually leave the tweak tool on quite a lot and still do a lot of other normal functionality, which is really cool. And it's those little things as you get used to that in Blender that you're going to start to love and appreciate about the software. So in this case, when I hit Q, it took me back to the tweak tool, but technically that's also your selection tool, right? R for scale, right? Remember, R is your quick key for scale. In this case, remember, you can always grab one of these handles, right? So if I just wanted to scale out it this way, I can just grab the red or the X, right? If I want to scale it out along the green, I can. But remember, if you middle mouse click, right, just hold down middle mouse button and drag, remember, that's your uniform scale. And you see how you can kind of make that antenna bigger and kind of bulgier? That's why I kind of put a few extra edge loops in here, because then it allows me to have more polygons, more edges to do shaping with, right? I can hit W for move, and I could middle mouse button to view move it a little bit. E for rotate, middle mouse button to do a little bit of view rotate. And you see how you can kind of get it like a little straighter there, right? Maybe W for move. We can just kind of move along these different views. Now at this point, if I want to, I could switch to my tweak tool, right? Remember, Q will just toggle through there till you get to it. But if you assign a quick key to it, then hey, it's even faster. I'm still in edge mode, right? Remember, that's 2. And I can just left click drag on this edge. And left click drag on that edge. And I can maybe even switch to my view. Remember, Alt left to rotate your camera. Left click drag on that edge. And you see the actual tweak selection is quite precise and works quite well. Really, the tweak tool in Blender is actually quite good. So we can see that just by adding a few extra edge loops up here with the loop cut, right? And then just doing a little bit of shaping by moving some edges, scaling some edge loops, maybe even doing a little bit of rotation, right, with your manipulators. We now have a kind of bulgier antenna, right? The same kind of thing we could do here to define a little bit more on our crab legs if we wanted to, right? So maybe we wanted this to be more pronounced than here. So remember, Alt-C, right? And that'll give us a loop cut. Now remember, you can just left-click and whatever edge you're over, and you notice it kind of gives you that great yellow pre-select, so you have a really good idea of where it's going to go. Remember, if you just click, it puts it right in the middle. But if you hold down left mouse button and drag, you can actually slide it, right? And I want to put that up there a little bit more. And then I'm going to hit R for scale, right? Remember, R is your quick key for scale. But remember, they are right here. And remember, middle mouse button. Although this one and this one will kind of do that same kind of view scale, uniform scale also. But middle mouse button actually uses those keys. So I just use middle mouse button so I don't have to move up to grab those handles. So if you just hold down middle mouse button, drag, remember that'll kind of uniform scale it either in or out, depending on which direction you drag it, right? And you see how we kind of made that a little thinner there? And we can do the same thing over here, right? Alt-C for loop cut. Remember, it is right here, though. Left-click drag, so we can slide that loop cut. Then we can hit R for scale. Then hold down middle mouse button, drag to scale it in a bit, right? And you notice that maybe this area gets a little thinner on this one, right? So remember, we're still in edge mode. So I can just switch to the tweak tool, right? And like I said, I actually assigned the quick key to spacebar, which I think is a cool one, right? But remember, if you just hit Q, it'll toggle through the tweak tool, right? Because Q is kind of the selection tool, but you see how it has the shortcut that says cycle. Q, it cycles through all of the tools that are in that menu. And I can just kind of grab this edge and just kind of bring it out a little bit, and that one. And you see I'm doing it from the view, right? So remember, view modeling, particularly when you're doing like a character creature, is quite useful, right? Not so much when we do some of our environmental stuff later on, but in this stage, it's quite useful. And your tweak tool by default uses that view to kind of do that. Remember, Control S will save, right? Good idea to save and save often, and also save a couple of different versions, right? So remember, you can go to File, and Save is just Control S, but Save As is Shift Control S, right? And you can go and you can give it a different name, right? So you can go and give it a different name, say, hey, version 2, version 3, and that way you have a couple of different versions. That way if something goes weird with one file, you've got some backups. So once again, I'm going to do the same thing I was doing on those ones. Alt-C for loop cut. Left-click drag on an edge, kind of move it up towards here. R for scale. Hold down middle mouse button to scale it in a little bit, right? And then if we want, we can switch to our tweak tool, right? Remember, I'm using spacebar because that's the quick key I assigned it to it, right? And if you right-click on a tool, you actually can assign the shortcuts from there, which is really, really easy. But remember, Q will toggle you through those, right? So Q, just like it would be in Maya, is your selection tool, except here it does that, but it also just toggles you through all of the options that are available in here, right? And these are actually all kind of versions of a selection tool. It's just that tweak allows you to move with the selection at the same time. We can just kind of tweak that edge, maybe tweak that one a little bit. There we go. Maybe bring that one down a little bit, that one up a little bit. And you see how we can just kind of get a little more definition, a little more form in here. So remember, as you're shaping, right, you really want to move some edges around sometimes. See how I can make that thigh there a little thicker. But remember, we were rotating. So remember, you can double left click on an edge loop. E for rotate, right? You want to make sure to rotate these so they don't collapse too much, right? If you don't do enough rotation, so it collapses too much. So you want that to be kind of, keep that shape better, right? Keep that volume. So that's partially just what we were talking about the other day in our little class lectures, that you can extrude, move, rotate, extrude, move, rotate, and that's going to allow you to give a more proper bend to this shape, right? You want to make sure to not have stuff overlapping as well. Remember, you can push stuff through to the side, and that creates that, and that's what's happening. So remember, you can actually get good structure, good extrusions that are creating proper edge loop structure for your model, and have bad shape, right? And that's one of the things that, in many ways, actually takes the most practice with, right? Learning how to extrude or loop cut is quite easy, and it's actually shaping that can sometimes be a little trickier. So really, like I said, this video is much more about just refining our shapes, adding a few extra edge loops to allow us to define those shapes a little bit more. Um, remembering the tweak tool is available, and that can be a great tool for doing stuff. Remember, the tweak tool will stay on, so if I hit 3 for face mode, I can now tweak faces, right? And if I wanted to kind of give this crab back a little bit more push, we can, right? And now we've got like that back just is kind of sticking out a little bit more, right? So there's all these cool little things we can define. And you notice that you can go back and add edge loops in, right? You can go back and extrude different faces. You can go back in and select edges or edge loops and move, rotate, and scale them. So once you've extruded, you're not done, right? You've just created kind of that that branch structure, like a tree, like a branch from a tree trunk, right? Which is pretty much all living things have that structure, right? So particularly if they're animals, but like even plants and trees have branches, right? So that extrusion really just gives us kind of a main appendage form, and we have to then use things like our tweak tool, move, rotate, and scale, either whole loop selections or just single loops or faces to adjust stuff, right? But we see that we can always adjust the form and the shape as we're going along. And we can start to get a pretty neat crab out of that, right? So a big part of like this video is just about shaping, right? No new tools were introduced, right? We've already talked about tweak tool in some of the other videos. We've talked about loop cut before. So this one's really not about new tools. It's just about continually using them to get better and just getting to different views, right? Now remember, F is frame selection. So what that can do is that can kind of zoom in and set your camera rotate around what was selected. Even if it was just something you were tweaking, it kind of leaves that selected, which is actually one of those things that's actually really quite neat, right? So you can always use face selection on that. Also, if you did in the edit preferences, right? Remember, I went to navigation, right? And I did set zoom to mouse position, right? And that also kind of gives you that thing where wherever your mouse is looking, right, your cursor, it'll zoom to that position, and it kind of gives you kind of a center for that as well. It doesn't always work quite as well as F for frame selection, but it's still useful, and it can still kind of work in a somewhat similar fashion. Just it's based on where your cursor is pointing, right? Remember, key map is also where that industry compatible pull down's at, right? At this point, I think you guys are all good there, right? But remember, edit preferences kind of has some of those things. All right. So one of the last things I wanted to do for this video was I wanted to kind of define this shell a little bit more back here, right? And that's going to be using the extrude tool, but we're going to use a slightly different option for the extrude tool. Because part of anything is getting you guys exposed to more and more tools as we go, and we build a model more. Remember, we've got several more projects for this year. We're going to build a sci-fi environment. We're going to build a car. We're going to build a much more complicated quadruped, kind of like a big rhino or dragon or something like that. That'll allow us to get more intricate with our modeling, right? Here we're trying to keep it simple enough with just little legs and antennas and stuff like that. So in this case, I want there to kind of be a bit more of a shell that comes off of here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to face mode, right? Remember, 3 for faces. Remember, though, edit mode and object mode are right here, though. So, right, we go back to object mode, and it's at the full object level. If we pull here, if we just left-click on this little pull-down, we can go to edit mode. And then you see vertex, edge, and face are available. Remember, those all have quick keys. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So in this case, I want to be in 3 for face mode, right? And I'm going to hit Q to toggle myself to the drag select, right? Or circle select, sorry. It's called drag select in my, but it's the same thing. Now in this case, you see I did assign myself a quick key to it, tab, right? And remember, if you right click, you can assign shortcut. In this case, it's saying change shortcut because I've already added one, but you just right click on the tool and that option comes up, and it's really easy to assign quick keys that way. And the nice thing is they're actually very specific to the workspace you're in, right? So a quick keys you assign here won't work in sculpting or UV editing, which is actually kind of neat. They'll kind of be unique to that different kind of workspace you're working in. And these are all the things that once I spent a lot more time with Blender, like I said, I kind of really fell in love with Blender. It's actually pretty amazing software nowadays, and the fact that it's free is really, really cool. So in this case, I want to circle select, right, which is drag select in other packages. Now, by default, it usually has a radius of 25, which is not terribly big. I don't really like the radius. It's up to you guys if you want to use it, so I just turn the radius down to 1. And the way the drag select works is you hold down your left mouse button, right? So just hold down your left mouse button, and you move your cursor, right? So you're really just drag selecting. It's quite neat for doing stuff like this. Now remember, if you want to add extra selections, hold down Shift. Right? Shift is pretty universally in most software, add selection. So if I hold down Shift and I left-click drag, you see I can kind of add that little loop there. Now in this case, what I wanted to do was kind of extrude, but kind of have it pull out along all of the normal directions. And remember, this is something we've talked about in some of the other videos, right? Normal direction is really the direction the polygon is facing, right? So I've talked about this a little bit in class lecture. I've even made sure to give you guys some videos. Remember that concepts video really kind of talks about it. But just to reinforce it, normal direction is really kind of the direction a polygon is looking, right, or facing. So this polygon's normal direction would be up this way. This polygon's direction would be this way. This polygon's direction would be that way. And same thing here, like these are this way. And so what I can do is if I, with those polygons selected, if I right-click, right, it brings up the face context menu. And you'll see that you have things like extrude face along normals, right? Extrude face along normals. And that's what I want to do. I want to extrude these faces along normals. So remember, there's actually a couple of different extrusion options, right? If I extrude individual faces, you see how it extrudes each one along the normal direction, but separate. In this case, I didn't want to do that. So I Control Z to undo, right? Control Z to undo. So I can just right-click extrude faces along normal because I want them to be all one big extrusion instead of individual extrusions. There we go. And you see how that kind of extrudes, right? It created that new geometry, but it pushes these things out along their normal direction. And you'll notice that it does a pretty good job of keeping this center seamed up because of the mirror clipping being on, right? Remember, all of this stuff is in those videos, so you can always go back and look. In this case, I'm going to maybe turn my tweak tool back on and tweak some faces a little bit more here. All right? And you notice how it won't pull that center off. Hit 2 for edge mode, and I can tweak that edge. And now I have kind of a little bit more of a shell. So I can kind of tweak some of these edges forward, maybe this one back a little bit. And it's a neat way to get to see that you do have the ability to extrude along normal direction really, really easily in Blender. And you see I can just come back in here with tweak. Right, remember, Q will toggle you through those if you haven't set a quick key up for it yet. And you see that I love the tweak tool. It's one of my favorite shaping tools, no matter what software I'm in, right? Maya has a version of it. Moto does. Pretty standard feature. And now we can see that I have, remember, A fits all, so I kind of fit the whole scene there. And now you see we're getting more of a full crab. But the neat thing is it's not a lot of tools, right? It's been loop cut, right? It's been extrude. And this time we saw that we can extrude for in face mode, right? 3 for faces. We can extrude, if you right click, right, it brings this menu up, you can extrude face along normals. And then it's really just been move, rotate, and scale and selecting faces or edge loops with tweaking if we wanted to for shaping, right? Circle select for that drag select. And it's really just kind of about getting you guys to use some really basic tools, but seeing how much you could do with those. And just getting used to the overall environment and shaping stuff. So like I said, that'll be, I think, a great place to stop for that video. And yeah.